News Talk Breakfast.
In association with AIR. Seamless connections with Ireland's #1 broadband provider.
The biggest story of the day, though, of course, is those explosions at Kabul airport yesterday. 13 US service members and at least 72 civilians killed. In a moment, we will talk to John Simpson from the BBC. But first off, just have a listen. US President Joe Biden addressed the nation last night. Here's a flavour of what he had to say.
To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this. We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
OK, that was the US President speaking last night. John Simpson, World Affairs Editor of the BBC. Joe Biden is talking tough, but rarely has America looked more powerless than it does at the moment.
Yes, I think you're right. There's nothing very much that Joe Biden can do now. Of course, he can call in airstrikes, but we've seen time and time again in Afghanistan in particular that airstrikes are really not very, very useful. They often miss their targets, and they're not as carefully targeted as we often think them to be. So he's in a very, very weak position entirely as a result of his own policies and what he's chosen to do in Afghanistan. If it hadn't have been for setting a deadline for withdrawal, the Taliban would have stayed quiet, and the Americans could have withdrawn most of their troops quietly, but the sense that they were still there, that they still had a presence, and that the other NATO and Western countries had a presence would have been the important thing which would have kept the Taliban quiet. He chose not to do that.
Did he choose it, John, or did his predecessor effectively choose it for him?
Well, I think you're right, actually. The Donald Trump administration reached a laughable agreement with the Taliban political leadership in Doha. It was signed in February of last year. At the time, I thought this is absolutely disastrous for Afghanistan. But having given that idea of ending the forever wars, that phrase was Joe Biden, in fact. Biden himself didn't feel able to kind of stand out against the Trump agreement and say, no, we're going to stay, we're not going to leave. But I mean, so many of his advisors, particularly the military advisors, said to him that was a mistake, and I just don't think you could say it wasn't a mistake now.
Horrendous loss of life yesterday in Kabul at the airport. It's a horrible question to have to ask, but can we expect more bombings in the coming days?
Well, you see, it wasn't done. I mean, I suppose most people would assume, there's the Taliban have captured Kabul, they've captured most of the country. They must be the ones involved. But in fact, it's a splinter group called Islamic State Khorasan, which has chosen to kind of pretty much declare war on the Taliban as well. So we're looking at a civil war that's already started. It's not between the Taliban, the representatives and servants and employees of the old government, the old pro-Western government. This is between one very extreme form of Islam and one even, if you can imagine such a thing, even more extreme form.
Does that civil war, threat of civil war, does it ironically mean that the Taliban may be less hardline with Afghan citizens in order to sort of, I suppose, keep their support if there is this enemy from within?
I don't think so. I think the ISK, the Islamic State Khorasan, it is so very extreme and so very small. I don't think there's a kind of competition going on, for public support. The Taliban themselves have no interest in public support. I mean, they feel that everything they do is justified on religious grounds. They've now stopped the playing of music in any kind of public place. They're starting to impose their old rules on women's dress and so forth. They've ordered girls not to go to school. I don't think there's any sort of a sort of sense of PR going on there. I think it's just a battle between two really extreme forms of Islam.
Between the Taliban's hardline and your suggestions of a prospect of a civil war, the future for Afghanistan over the coming years is pretty grim, is it?
It's very grim. It's very grim indeed. I mean, it's impossible to think that anybody can go and help now. You know, the after 2001, the fact that Western powers were there, most of the United States was there, was a real boost to Afghan society. Millions of people came back to the country from exile. Afghanistan was booming commercially and economically, and people were starting to lead a kind of decent life again. It wasn't by any means perfect, but I don't suppose there's anybody in Afghanistan now who wouldn't choose, if they could, to go back to the time between 2001 and last week.
Horrendous for the people who have to live in the country. What about those who have, like, for example, I think there's 60 Irish citizens still there who were, with the Irish government, weren't able to get out of the country. And I'm sure it's the same for many other Western countries. What do those people now do? I mean, is the possibility of getting out of the country via, I don't know, the other borders, the land borders, is that a possibility? Do they just have to keep the head down and hope they can get out in the future?
Well, that's certainly what friends of mine in Afghanistan are doing, hoping not to be identified as being in any way kind of pro-Western. Just wait for this appalling violence to quiet down, and then make their way out to Iran, to Pakistan in particular, and just slip across the border. I mean, the border is vast to both those countries and to the old former Soviet republics to the north. And it shouldn't be too difficult to get across. The problem comes then, do you have to sit in a refugee camp in all that misery for years upon years? Or can you perhaps make it to Ireland or make it to whatever country that you would like? Will the Irish government be enthusiastic in a few years' time about receiving people from Afghanistan? You know, there's so many ifs about it that it's an appalling prospect to be faced with.
Absolutely appalling. Just very finally, John, just to go back to the US, Joe Biden damaged internationally. Is he damaged much in the US, or is there just a feeling in the US we just need to get out of Afghanistan and end this war?
Well, the opinion polls show that is what most people think. We should just get out, and it's we should never have been there in the first place. Just who cares about them, and so on. But I think what's happened is that Joe Biden now looks really, really weak. I mean, these kind of shaking his fist at the Taliban and to IS Khorasan and saying, we will get you, we will do this. I don't think anybody thinks it's terribly likely that they will. and it makes him look, old and feeble and inadequate. And I think long after most Americans have forgotten all about Afghanistan, that perception will still be there for him.
John Simpson, World Affairs Editor of the BBC, thank you for talking to News Talk Breakfast this morning.